Did you know there's an instinct so powerful in women that it can make them abandon children, family, and an entire lifetime built up in a matter of days? Carl Jung discovered something that shook the foundations of psychology. There's a primitive force operating in the female mind that is more influential than love, stronger than logic, and more dominant than any other human feeling. This unique instinct explains why she can be completely in love with you today and tomorrow leave with another man without looking back. Why intelligent and successful women make choices that seem like complete self-destruction. Why she ignores the man who offers everything and surrenders to the one who offers nothing. Jung called this discovery the best-kept secret of female nature. It's a mechanism as old as the human species itself, programmed into female DNA to guarantee something very specific. When you discover what this instinct is, you'll never see women's behavior the same way again. Prepare yourself for a revelation that will shock you. The unique instinct that Jung revealed. Deep in the archives of psychological research lies a discovery so profound that it changed everything we thought we knew about female behavior. Carl Jung spent decades studying the human mind, but nothing prepared him for what he would uncover about women's deepest motivations. What he found wasn't just another theory or academic concept. It was a biological reality that has been shaping human relationships for thousands of years. This instinct operates below the surface of conscious thought, driving decisions that often appear completely irrational to outside observers. It's not influenced by education, social status, or intelligence. A PhD professor can be just as controlled by this force as someone who never finished high school. Wealth doesn't protect against it. Neither does age, experience, or wisdom gained from past relationships. The instinct Jung identified is selection-based survival programming. At its core, it's the unconscious drive to seek out genetic material that will produce the strongest possible offspring. But here's where it gets fascinating. This programming doesn't care about modern concepts of compatibility, shared values, or even happiness. It operates on ancient algorithms that were useful when humans lived in caves and survival depended on physical strength and dominance. What makes this discovery so shocking is how it manifests in today's world. A woman might consciously want stability, kindness, and emotional support. She might genuinely believe these qualities matter most to her. But when this primal instinct activates, all those conscious desires become secondary. Suddenly, she finds herself drawn to men who display traits her rational mind knows are problematic. The biological markers this instinct responds to are surprisingly specific. Confidence that borders on arrogance triggers it more than humble kindness. Unpredictability activates it more than reliability. Risk-taking behavior stimulates it more than careful planning. These aren't conscious preferences. They're hardwired responses that bypass rational thought entirely. Jung realized that women experiencing this activation often describe feeling like they're not themselves. They make decisions that seem completely out of character. They ignore advice from friends and family. They abandon plans and commitments they previously valued. This isn't weakness or poor judgment, it's biology overriding conscious choice. The timing of when this instinct becomes active is also crucial. It doesn't operate consistently throughout a woman's life. There are specific periods when it becomes more dominant, often coinciding with biological cycles and life transitions. Understanding these patterns was key to Jung's breakthrough in comprehending female psychology. Perhaps most importantly, Jung discovered that this instinct operates independently of love. A woman can genuinely love one man while being biologically drawn to another. She can have deep emotional connections, shared memories, and genuine care for someone, yet still feel an overwhelming pull toward a different type of person entirely. This creates the internal conflict that leads to so many seemingly inexplicable relationship decisions. The power of this programming is so strong that it can override years of relationship building in a matter of days or even hours. Jung documented cases where women left stable, loving relationships after brief encounters with men who activated this biological response. The rational mind tries to create explanations afterward, but the decision was made at a level far below conscious reasoning. What's particularly striking is how this instinct affects perception itself. When activated, a woman begins to see the same behaviors differently depending on who displays them. Aggression from the wrong man feels threatening, but identical behavior from someone who triggers this instinct feels exciting and protective. Emotional unavailability from a stable partner feels cold, but the same trait in a biologically appealing man feels mysterious and challenging. Jung's research revealed that fighting against this instinct is nearly impossible because it operates through the reward systems in the brain. When a woman encounters someone who activates this programming, her brain releases a cocktail of chemicals that create intense feelings of attraction, excitement, and even euphoria. These aren't emotions she's choosing to feel. They're biological responses as automatic as hunger or thirst. This discovery explains why traditional relationship advice often fails with women. Suggestions to choose the good guy or think logically about your future miss the point entirely. When this instinct is active, logic becomes a secondary consideration. The biological programming is designed to override rational thought because, from an evolutionary perspective, genetic selection was more important than individual happiness. Understanding this mechanism doesn't diminish women or reduce them to biology. Instead, it reveals the incredible power of forces that have shaped human behavior for millennia. Jung's breakthrough wasn't about judging these responses, but about recognizing them as fundamental aspects of human nature that operate whether we acknowledge them or not. 2. How this instinct overcomes love. The relationship between this primal instinct and love is perhaps the most confusing aspect of human relationships. Most people assume that love is the strongest force in romantic connections, but Jung's research revealed something far more complex. Love operates in the conscious mind, building connections through shared experiences, emotional intimacy, and rational compatibility. This biological instinct, however, works at a much deeper level, often in direct opposition to conscious feelings. When this instinct activates, it doesn't replace love, it simply becomes more powerful than love. A woman can remain deeply in love with her partner while simultaneously feeling an overwhelming biological pull towards someone else. This creates an internal war between what she consciously wants and what her biology demands. The result is often confusion, guilt, and decisions that seem to contradict everything she previously believed about herself. The mechanism behind this override is rooted in brain chemistry. Love releases oxytocin and dopamine, creating feelings of bonding and pleasure. But when the survival instinct activates, it triggers a different chemical cascade involving adrenaline, norepinephrine, and a specific cocktail of hormones designed to focus attention and create intense motivation. This biological response is so powerful that it can literally change how a woman's brain processes information about relationships. What makes this particularly devastating for relationships is how quickly it can happen. Love builds slowly over time through consistent positive interactions. This instinct can activate in minutes or hours upon meeting someone who displays the right biological markers. The speed and intensity of this response often catches women completely off guard, leading them to question everything they thought they knew about their own desires. The instinct also changes how women interpret their current relationships. Behaviors from a loving partner that once felt caring might suddenly seem boring or suffocating. Stability that once provided comfort might feel like stagnation. The biological programming creates a filter that reframes existing relationships in a negative light while highlighting the exciting uncertainty of new possibilities. Jung observed that women in this state often describe feeling like they're falling out of love, but what's actually happening is that their biological priorities have shifted. The qualities that create lasting love, kindness, reliability, emotional availability, become less important than the traits that signal genetic fitness. This shift in priorities makes the current relationship feel inadequate, even when nothing has actually changed about the partner's behavior. The timing of when this override occurs is also significant. It often happens during periods of biological transition, certain points in monthly cycles, life changes, or times of stress. During these windows, the instinct becomes more active and can override even very strong, loving feelings. Women experiencing this often report feeling like a switch was flipped, transforming their entire perspective on their relationship overnight. Perhaps most tragically, this biological override can cause women to sabotage relationships with partners who genuinely love them. The instinct doesn't just create attraction to other men, it actively creates dissatisfaction with current partners who don't trigger the same biological response. This leads to picking fights, finding fault with previously acceptable behaviors, and creating distance in the relationship. The guilt associated with these feelings often makes the situation worse. Women know they love their partners and can't understand why they suddenly feel differently. They might blame themselves for being shallow or ungrateful, not realizing they're experiencing a biological response beyond their conscious control. This internal conflict between love and instinct creates emotional turmoil that affects every aspect of their relationships. What's particularly challenging is that this instinct operates independently of relationship satisfaction. A woman might be completely happy with her partner, grateful for their relationship, and have no conscious complaints. Yet when this biological programming activates, none of that conscious satisfaction matters. The instinct evaluates potential partners based on completely different criteria than those that create relationship happiness. Jung discovered that trying to fight this override through willpower alone rarely works. The biological forces involved are too powerful and operate below the level of conscious choice. Instead, understanding becomes the key. When women recognize what's happening as a biological response, rather than a reflection of their true feelings, they can make more informed decisions about how to handle these situations. The instinct also affects memory and perception in ways that reinforce its power. When activated, it can cause women to remember past relationship problems more vividly, while minimizing positive memories. It highlights the excitement and potential of new connections while downplaying their risks. This selective processing of information makes the biological choice seem more rational than it actually is. Understanding how this instinct overcomes love doesn't diminish the reality of either force. Both are legitimate aspects of human experience. Love creates the foundation for lasting relationships, emotional intimacy, and shared life building. The biological instinct serves evolutionary purposes related to genetic diversity and survival. The tragedy occurs when people don't understand that both can exist simultaneously, leading to decisions that destroy loving relationships in pursuit of biological satisfaction that may ultimately prove temporary and unsatisfying. By the way, if you're curious to go even deeper and integrate your shadows and light, check out the SIM Method ebook. It's a concise guide that can help you unlock your inner power in just 5 minutes a day. The link is in the first pinned comment below. 3. Why she abandons everything for him. The moment this ancient instinct locks onto a target, rational decision-making becomes almost impossible. Women who have spent years building careers, relationships, and stable lives can find themselves willing to throw it all away for someone they barely know. This isn't about being weak or lacking self-control. It's about a biological program so powerful that it can override decades of careful life planning in a matter of days. When Jung studied this phenomenon, he found that the abandonment isn't gradual or thoughtful. It happens with shocking speed and intensity. A woman might spend months or years making careful decisions about her future, weighing pros and cons, considering consequences. But when this instinct activates, all that careful planning becomes irrelevant. The biological drive creates such intense focus on one person that everything else in her life starts to feel meaningless by comparison. The mechanism behind this abandonment is linked to how the brain processes priorities during intense biological attraction. Normal decision-making involves weighing multiple factors: financial security, family relationships, career goals, personal values. But when this primal programming takes over, it creates tunnel vision. The brain starts filtering out information that doesn't support pursuing this new attraction while amplifying anything that justifies dramatic life changes. What makes this particularly devastating is how it affects her perception of what she's giving up. Things that once felt important, her job, her home, her support network, suddenly seem like obstacles preventing her from following this overwhelming pull. The biological programming doesn't just create attraction to someone new, it actively diminishes the value of everything that might compete with that attraction. The speed of these decisions often shocks everyone around her, including herself. Jung documented cases where women left marriages, quit jobs, and moved across the country within weeks of meeting someone who triggered this response. From the outside, these decisions appear completely irrational. But from inside the experience, they feel not just reasonable, but absolutely necessary. This instinct also creates a unique form of tunnel vision that affects how she processes risk. Normally, major life changes require careful consideration of potential consequences. But when this biological program is running, the brain actually suppresses awareness of negative possibilities while heightening focus on potential rewards. She might ignore obvious red flags about this new person while simultaneously magnifying problems with her current situation. The emotional state created by this instinct mimics what people describe as feeling alive for the first time. Everything in her previous life suddenly feels grey and lifeless by comparison. This isn't because her life was actually problematic. It's because the biological response creates such intense stimulation that normal experiences pale in comparison. The contrast makes abandoning everything feel like awakening from a long sleep rather than destroying a good life. Family and friends watching this happen often feel helpless and confused. They see someone they care about making obviously destructive choices and can't understand why logical arguments have no effect. What they don't realize is that logic has been temporarily overridden by programming designed to bypass rational thought. Trying to reason with someone in this state is like trying to talk someone out of being hungry. The biological drive is stronger than conscious reasoning. The timing of when this abandonment occurs often coincides with periods when women are biologically primed for major life changes. Certain hormonal cycles, life transitions, or stress periods can make this instinct more active and influential. During these windows, the pull toward dramatic change becomes almost irresistible, especially when combined with encountering someone who triggers the biological response. What's particularly tragic is how this affects relationships with people who genuinely care about her. Parents, siblings, close friends, and loving partners find themselves suddenly treated as obstacles to be overcome rather than important connections to be preserved. The biological programming creates such intense focus on the new attraction that other relationships lose their emotional significance almost overnight. The instinct also affects how she interprets resistance from others. When family and friends express concern about her dramatic changes, the biological programming filters this concern as jealousy or attempts to control her rather than genuine care. This creates an us versus them mentality that further isolates her from her support network and makes the abandonment feel more justified. Jung observed that women experiencing this often describe feeling like they're finally being true to themselves, even when their actions contradict everything they previously valued. The biological response creates such intense internal conviction that abandoning everything feels like following authentic desires rather than destroying a carefully built life. This internal certainty makes outside input seem irrelevant or misguided. The aftermath of these decisions often brings crushing regret once the biological intensity fades. Women who abandoned careers, relationships, and security find themselves in situations they would never have chosen with a clear mind. But by then, the damage to their previous life is often irreversible. Jobs have been lost, relationships have been destroyed, and support networks have been damaged by the sudden abandonment. Understanding this pattern doesn't excuse the destruction it can cause, but it does explain why it happens with such regularity. The biological programming doesn't care about human social structures, career goals, or relationship commitments. It's designed to override these considerations when genetic selection opportunities arise. Recognizing this as a biological phenomenon rather than a character flaw is the first step in understanding why intelligent, capable women sometimes make choices that appear completely self-destructive. 4. The invisible power she cannot control. The most unsettling aspect of this biological instinct is how completely it operates outside conscious awareness. Women experiencing its influence genuinely believe they're making rational choices based on their own desires and preferences. They don't realize they're being driven by programming that bypasses their conscious mind entirely. This invisibility makes the instinct particularly powerful because there's no internal resistance to something that doesn't feel like external control. Jung discovered that this hidden influence works by subtly altering perception and judgment rather than creating obvious compulsions. A woman doesn't suddenly feel an irresistible urge that she recognizes as foreign to her normal thinking. Instead, her preferences, attractions, and decision-making criteria shift in ways that feel completely natural and authentic. She experiences these changes as personal growth, or discovering what she really wants, not as being controlled by biological programming. The mechanism operates through what Jung called emotional reframing. The same situations, behaviors, and people that existed before suddenly trigger different emotional responses. A stable relationship that once felt secure might now feel boring. A predictable routine that once provided comfort might now feel suffocating. These aren't conscious decisions to view things differently. They're automatic changes in how her brain processes and responds to familiar situations. What makes this particularly insidious is how it affects memory and interpretation of past events. When this instinct becomes active, it doesn't just change how she sees the present, it actually alters how she remembers the past. Previous relationship conflicts become more significant in memory, while positive experiences fade. This selective memory enhancement makes her current situation seem worse than it actually was, while making new possibilities appear more promising than they might be. The instinct also operates by changing what captures her attention. Normally, people notice a wide range of information about potential partners: their kindness, reliability, shared interests, life goals. But when this biological programming activates, attention becomes laser-focused on specific traits linked to genetic fitness. She might become intensely aware of physical presence, confidence, or dominance, while barely noticing character traits that would normally matter to her. This selective attention creates a distorted picture of both her current situation and new possibilities. She might overlook obvious problems with someone new while becoming hypersensitive to minor issues with her current partner. The biological programming essentially puts filters on her perception that highlight information supporting its agenda while screening out contradictory evidence. Jung found that women in this state often report feeling more intuitive or in touch with their true desires. What they're actually experiencing is the influence of ancient biological programming that feels authentic because it's coming from such a deep level of their psyche. The instinct doesn't feel like external manipulation. It feels like finally understanding what they really want after years of self-deception. The power of this hidden influence becomes most apparent when women try to resist attractions they know are problematic. They might consciously recognize that someone is wrong for them, bad for their future, or likely to cause problems. But despite this intellectual understanding, they find themselves unable to stop thinking about this person, making excuses for concerning behavior, or creating opportunities to interact despite their better judgment. This creates an internal war between conscious knowledge and unconscious drive that many women find extremely distressing. They know they should stay away from certain people or situations, but find themselves repeatedly drawn back despite repeated disappointments or obvious red flags. This isn't weakness or poor self-control. It's the result of competing systems in the brain where the biological programming often wins. The invisibility of this control also affects how women interpret their own behavior. When they make choices that surprise their friends and family, they create rational explanations that seem to make sense. They might say they've grown as a person or finally know what they want, without realizing these explanations are covering for decisions made by unconscious biological drives. Perhaps most troubling is how this hidden programming can make women feel responsible for choices they didn't consciously make. When relationships end badly or life changes lead to negative consequences, they blame themselves for poor decision-making. They don't realize they were operating under the influence of biological forces designed to bypass conscious choice, leading to guilt and self-criticism that compounds the damage. The instinct's invisibility also makes it nearly impossible to warn someone about its influence. Telling a woman she's being controlled by biological programming sounds insulting or dismissive of her agency. Since she experiences the influence as her own authentic desires, suggestions that she's not in control of her choices feel like attacks on her intelligence or autonomy. Jung realized that recognizing this invisible influence requires a level of self-awareness that's difficult to achieve while experiencing it. It's like trying to examine your own eyes. The very tool you need to see is the thing you're trying to observe. This creates a catch-22, where the people most in need of understanding this dynamic are least likely to recognize it in themselves while it's happening. 5. When this instinct awakens in her. The awakening of this primal instinct doesn't happen randomly or constantly. Jung discovered that there are specific biological and psychological windows when women become most susceptible to its influence. Understanding these trigger periods explains why someone can be perfectly content in their relationship for years, then suddenly become restless and attracted to completely different types of people seemingly overnight. The most predictable trigger occurs during certain phases of monthly biological cycles. Jung observed that women often report sudden shifts in what they find attractive during specific hormonal windows. A partner who seemed perfectly adequate just days before might suddenly feel boring or inadequate. Men who would normally seem inappropriate or problematic can become intensely appealing during these periods. This isn't conscious preference changing. It's biology, temporarily altering the criteria for attraction. Major life transitions also create vulnerability windows. career changes, moving to new locations, significant birthdays, or completing major goals can trigger a biological reassessment period. During these times, the instinct becomes more active as the unconscious mind evaluates whether current relationships and life choices still serve genetic and survival purposes. Women going through these transitions often describe feeling like they're not the same person they used to be. Stress and emotional upheaval create another pathway for this instinct to emerge. When normal life routines are disrupted by illness, family problems, work pressure, or other significant challenges, the biological programming can interpret this as a signal that current life strategies aren't working. This triggers a search for alternatives, often manifesting as sudden dissatisfaction with previously acceptable relationships and attraction to very different types of people. The instinct also awakens during periods of boredom or routine stagnation. When life becomes too predictable, the biological programming can misinterpret safety and stability as stagnation that might threaten long-term survival prospects. This creates an unconscious drive to seek stimulation and change, often through relationships with people who represent excitement and unpredictability. Jung noticed that exposure to certain types of men can also trigger this awakening even when no other factors are present. Men who display strong confidence, physical presence, or willing to take risks can activate the biological response in women who were previously content. This isn't about conscious attraction, it's about biological recognition systems responding to signals of genetic fitness. Social situations that involve competition or comparison can also awaken this instinct. Weddings, social gatherings, or situations where women observe other couples can trigger unconscious evaluations of their own relationships. During these comparisons, the biological programming might decide that better options are available, leading to sudden dissatisfaction with previously satisfying partnerships. The awakening process often begins with subtle changes in mood and perception before becoming more obvious. Women might notice themselves daydreaming more, feeling restless, or becoming critical of things that never bothered them before. They might find themselves paying more attention to other men, or feeling less satisfied with physical intimacy in their current relationship. What makes this awakening particularly dangerous is that it often occurs during otherwise stable periods. Women who are happily married, successful in their careers, and satisfied with their lives can suddenly find themselves questioning everything. This timing makes the biological response feel more significant than it actually is, as if it's revealing hidden truths about their desires rather than representing temporary hormonal influences. The intensity of the awakening varies significantly between individuals and situations. Some women experience gradual shifts in attraction and interest over weeks or months. Others report dramatic overnight changes where they wake up feeling completely different about their relationships and life choices. The speed and intensity often correlate with how strongly the triggering factors align with the biological programming. Environmental factors can also influence when this instinct awakens. Certain settings, social events, travel, new work environments, can create conditions that make the biological response more likely. These environments often involve meeting new people, experiencing different social dynamics, or breaking routine patterns that normally keep the instinct dormant. The awakening is often accompanied by a sense of clarity and purpose that feels very convincing. Women describe feeling like they're finally seeing their situation clearly after years of confusion or self-deception. This feeling of revelation makes the biological influence seem like personal insight rather than temporary programming activation. Jung found that understanding these trigger patterns could help women recognize when they might be more vulnerable to making dramatic life changes. However, simply knowing about the triggers doesn't make someone immune to their influence. The biological programming is designed to override conscious awareness, making it feel authentic and urgent regardless of intellectual understanding. The duration of these awakening periods also varies significantly. Some women experience brief episodes lasting days or weeks before returning to their previous state of mind. Others find that once awakened, the instinct remains active for months or even years, fundamentally altering their approach to relationships and life choices. 6. The men who activate this mechanism. Not all men trigger this powerful biological response. Jung discovered that specific traits and behaviors act as keys that unlock this ancient programming, often in ways that have nothing to do with being a good partner or even a decent person. Understanding these activation patterns explains why women sometimes choose men who seem obviously wrong for them while overlooking others who would clearly treat them better. Physical presence plays a crucial role in triggering this instinct. Men who occupy space confidently, move with purpose, and demonstrate physical capability activate biological recognition systems that operate below conscious awareness. This isn't about conventional attractiveness or muscle mass. It's about displaying the kind of physical confidence that would have signaled survival capability in ancestral environments. Emotional unavailability often serves as a powerful trigger, though not for the reasons most people assume. The biological programming interprets a man's indifference or emotional distance as a sign that he has abundant options and doesn't need to pursue any particular woman. This scarcity signals high genetic value to the unconscious mind, making him seem more desirable than men who show obvious interest and availability. Risk-taking behavior activates this instinct because it demonstrates willingness to face danger for potential rewards. Men who take calculated risks in business, sports, or other areas trigger biological responses linked to leadership and resource acquisition. However, the programming doesn't distinguish between smart risks and reckless behavior, which explains attraction to men whose risk-taking is actually destructive. Social dominance serves as another key trigger. Men who naturally command attention in groups, make decisions easily, and influence others activate ancient recognition systems for leadership qualities. This can manifest as attraction to men in positions of authority, those who take charge in social situations, or even those who display dominance through less positive means like aggression or control. Unpredictability creates biological interest because it prevents the woman from fully understanding or controlling the man's behavior. The instinct interprets this unpredictability as genetic complexity that might produce adaptable offspring. Men who are sometimes warm and sometimes cold, who make surprising decisions, or who reveal new aspects of themselves over time, maintain biological interest longer than those who are completely transparent. Competition triggers this mechanism powerfully. Men who are pursued by other women, successful in competitive environments, or who have options they're willing to exercise, activate biological programming designed to recognize genetic quality through social proof. The unconscious mind interprets other women's interest as validation of this man's genetic value. Intelligence combined with edge triggers this instinct in ways that pure intelligence alone does not. Men who are smart, but also willing to challenge social norms, break rules, or operate outside conventional boundaries, activate programming that recognizes both genetic quality and survival capability. This explains attraction to brilliant men who are also rebellious or unconventional. Financial resources alone don't typically trigger this biological response unless combined with other factors. However, men who acquire resources through risk-taking, competition, or dominance do activate the instinct. It's not the money itself, but the behaviors that generated the money that trigger the biological recognition systems. Mysterious or secretive behavior activates this programming because it suggests hidden depth and complexity. Men who don't reveal everything about themselves, who have private interests or activities, or who maintain independence despite being in relationships trigger biological curiosity designed to investigate potential genetic complexity. The timing of when men display these traits also matters significantly. Behaviors that might normally seem negative can become powerfully attractive when displayed during the right moments. A man showing protective aggression when she feels threatened might trigger intense biological attraction, while the same aggression displayed inappropriately would be repulsive. What's particularly important to understand is that these triggers operate independently of whether the man would actually make a good partner. The biological programming evolved in environments very different from modern society and responds to traits that were useful for survival and reproduction in ancestral conditions, but may be problematic in contemporary relationships. Men who activate this mechanism often do so without conscious intention or awareness. They might simply be expressing natural aspects of their personality that happen to align with these ancient triggers. This unconscious activation can create intense attraction that neither person fully understands or controls. The intensity of the biological response also depends on how many of these triggers a man displays simultaneously. Someone who exhibits multiple traits, physical confidence, emotional unavailability, risk-taking, and social dominance, creates a much stronger activation than someone who only displays one or two of these characteristics. Jung observed that men who successfully trigger this instinct often have complex personalities that combine attractive and problematic traits. They might be confident but also arrogant, successful but also unreliable, exciting but also dangerous. This combination creates the kind of genetic complexity that the biological programming is designed to identify and pursue, regardless of the practical consequences for modern relationships. 7. Why logic doesn't work here. The most frustrating aspect of this biological instinct is how completely it bypasses rational thought processes. Well-meaning friends and family members often try to help women in these situations by presenting logical arguments, making lists of pros and cons, or pointing out obvious problems with their choices. What they don't understand is that logic operates in a completely different part of the brain than this ancient programming, and when the two systems conflict, biology usually wins. The biological instinct processes information through pathways that developed millions of years before humans had language or complex reasoning abilities. These ancient circuits are designed for rapid decision-making in life or death situations, where taking time to think could mean missing crucial opportunities or failing to survive immediate threats. When this system activates, it treats relationship decisions with the same urgency and importance as escaping from predators or securing food during famines. Logical reasoning requires the prefrontal cortex, the newest part of the human brain in evolutionary terms. This is where we weigh options, consider consequences, and make plans for the future. But when powerful biological drives activate, they flood the brain with chemicals that actually suppress activity in the prefrontal cortex. This isn't a design flaw. It's an evolutionary feature that prevents overthinking during situations where quick action was historically necessary for survival. The chemical cocktail released during biological attraction includes substances that create tunnel vision and reduce ability to process information that contradicts the biological choice. Dopamine creates intense focus on the target, while norepinephrine heightens emotional responses and reduces capacity for complex reasoning. These chemicals literally change how the brain processes information, making logical arguments feel irrelevant or even annoying. Women experiencing this biological override often report that logical concerns about their choices feel abstract and unimportant. Compared to the intense emotions they're experiencing, they might acknowledge that someone is bad for them intellectually while simultaneously feeling unable to stay away emotionally. This creates internal conflict between what they know and what they feel, with feelings usually proving stronger than knowledge. The timing of when people try to use logic also affects its effectiveness. During periods of intense biological attraction, the brain is essentially programmed to ignore information that might interfere with pursuing the genetic opportunity. Arguments about practical concerns, future consequences, or relationship problems get filtered out as irrelevant noise that distracts from the important biological mission. Logical arguments can actually backfire during these periods because they're interpreted as interference with authentic desires. When someone presents rational reasons why a particular choice is problematic, the biological programming can frame this as others trying to control her decisions or prevent her from following her true nature. This creates resistance to logic and makes the biological choice feel more authentic and important. The social pressure that often accompanies logical arguments makes them even less effective. When family and friends gang up to present rational objections to someone's romantic choices, it can trigger defensive responses that strengthen commitment to the biologically driven decision. The feeling of everyone being against her choice makes it seem more significant and worth fighting for rather than reconsidering. Jung discovered that the biological instinct actually has its own form of logic that operates according to different rules than conscious reasoning. This biological logic prioritizes genetic fitness, survival advantage, and reproductive success over contemporary concerns like compatibility, shared values, or emotional stability. From this biological perspective, choosing the genetically superior option makes perfect sense, even if it seems irrational by modern standards. The evidence that logical reasoning presents often gets reinterpreted through the filter of biological attraction. Red flags about someone's character get minimized as unimportant details or signs that he's exciting and unconventional. Financial instability gets reframed as evidence that he's willing to take risks for greater rewards. Emotional unavailability becomes proof that he's selective and therefore more valuable. Memory also becomes selective during these periods, making logical arguments less effective. Positive interactions with the biologically attractive person get remembered more vividly, while negative experiences fade or get reinterpreted as misunderstandings. This selective memory makes the biological choice seem more reasonable than it actually is, based on objective evidence. The intensity of the biological response creates conviction that feels stronger than logical analysis. When someone is experiencing powerful attraction combined with the chemical rush of new possibility, logical concerns feel weak and uncertain by comparison. The biological response provides emotional certainty that logical analysis cannot match, making rational arguments seem wishy-washy or overthinking. Women going through this often describe feeling like others don't understand what they're experiencing or seeing something that other people are missing. This isn't delusion. It's the result of biological programming that creates different priorities and different ways of processing information about relationships. What seems obviously problematic to logical analysis might genuinely feel less important than the biological indicators they're responding to. Perhaps most importantly, Jung realized that fighting biological drives with logic alone rarely succeeds because it's trying to override millions of years of evolutionary programming with recent developments in human reasoning ability. The biological systems are older, more powerful, and designed specifically to bypass conscious thought when genetic opportunities arise. This doesn't mean women are incapable of rational choice or that biology determines everything. But it does mean that understanding these forces requires recognizing that human beings operate with multiple decision-making systems that don't always agree with each other. The most effective approaches acknowledge the power of biological drives, while working with them, rather than simply trying to override them through rational argument. The frustration that friends and family feel when their logical arguments have no effect is understandable but misplaced. They're essentially trying to convince someone to ignore powerful biological signals using tools that operate in a completely different part of the brain. Understanding why logic doesn't work in these situations is the first step toward finding more effective ways to help people navigate the conflict between biological drives and conscious choice.